You're listening to Procurement 6, the weekly podcast from the team at Art of Procurement that summarizes this week in procurement in just 6 short segments.
Hi there. I'm Kelly Barner, and today is Friday, November 4th, 2022.
6.
This week's edition of the Procurement 6 is brought to you by the team at CoreCentric. On November 8th, Philip Idson will be hosting an AOP Live session featuring Christopher Kane, Senior Director of Global Procurement and Strategic Sourcing at Sarepta Therapeutics, as well as Jennifer Ulrich, VP of Advisory from CoreCentric. Chris will talk about Sarepta's procurement evolutionary journey, including the successes and challenges they experienced along the way. Jennifer will give us a bigger picture context that addresses the considerations all companies should be aware of as they mature. To register and submit questions in advance, go to artofprocurement.com/calendar or click the link in today's show notes.
5.
In this week's Art of Procurement podcast, we're featuring a truly unique session from Mastermind Live 2022. Philip Idson was joined by Lou Alexander, a former NFL and Division I football player who now works with procurement teams daily as part of his role at Procurement IQ. I was a high school and college athlete, and the athlete's mindset, as Lou describes it, has been just as essential since I became an entrepreneur as it was back then. So how does Lou explain the meaning of the athlete's mindset, and where did that idea come from? Let's listen to this exchange.
So talk to me about the athlete's mindset then. What do you consider to be the main components of the athlete's mindset?
So to make just out of all of this make sense, and I just want to go back to like my childhood, right? And how my mindset formed and then how someone can piggyback off of it. So for me, I'm one of 10, right? There was 10 siblings and I'm the baby of 10 siblings, right? And so for me personally, my entire life was about trying to figure out how to be strategic, but also too how to impress, my siblings. So I always used to use the joke where, taking my older brother clothes to go to school was a strategy, right? But the end result may have not been what I wanted when I got home. And he's seen that I've tore his shoes up and put his shirt on. And anyone that has siblings, they can kind of, reason with me with this. But for me personally, it started early. And the athlete's mindset is just truly constructed by how many questions are you asking to develop and get better, right? Mm-hmm. Athletes start with development, right? And this transpires in business also, but athletes start with development. From the age you start playing that sport, right? How are you developing mentally? And then the physical components will show up, right? Fortunately for me, I was blessed physically early on. So it was more so about how do I develop the mentality of pushing through hard times when someone does tell me that I'm not good enough, right? Yeah. And you have to have thick skin being an athlete. Sometimes we get lost in the sauce of thinking we are the best at whatever we do. And when someone does tell us that we're not the best, how do we respond to it, right?
I wholeheartedly agree that you have to have thick skin to be an athlete. And, truthfully, to succeed in most other walks of life. The athlete's mindset isn't about winning. It drives you in the moments when no one is looking. When the prize is miles or months away. Will you do one more rep? Can you pick up the pace just a little? My sport was rowing, and one of my coaches gave us a piece of advice that I've never forgotten. Every time your oar makes contact with the water, think about yourself climbing an icy mountain in the dark. Will your pick make contact? Will it hold? The answers to those questions are the difference between success and failure, and only you can answer them using that athlete's mindset. Do not miss this extraordinary episode of the Art of Procurement podcast. You can find it at artofprocurement.com/podcast or on your favorite podcast listening platform.
4.
Another piece of content we shared on Art of Procurement this week also connects to our partnership with the team at Procurement IQ. We looked into the buyer power score for intermodal container rentals. These standardized steel boxes are primarily used to secure and transport goods internationally, and they are referred to as intermodal because they can be used across multiple forms of transportation, including ships, railways, and trucks. Rental rates are expected to rise over the next 3 years as global economic activity continues to mount in the wake of the pandemic. So even though the buyer power score is negative 2.1, a number that would typically put the power in the supplier's hands, conditions are expected to worsen going forward. Part of the challenge here is the lack of substitutes. Aside from purchasing the containers, there are really no comparable alternatives. To read the article, just head to the Art of Procurement homepage where you'll always find something new and compelling to read, listen to, or watch.
This is Procurement 6 from Art of Procurement. To get notified every time an episode is published, go to artofprocurement.com/subscribe. 3.
I mentioned the upcoming AOP Live we are hosting with the team at CoreCentric. AOP Live events are really built around community engagement. You ask questions in advance, you ask questions live, and we put those questions to our guests and speakers. Another way you can engage is by voting in the LinkedIn Pulse poll associated with the event. In this case, we've asked, what is the most important factor in advancing procurement's maturity? The options are salaries and training, processes and frameworks, C-level support, and sophisticated tech. I'm not going to give you any spoiler alerts on the results, but if you listen to this session on Friday or Saturday, you'll still have an opportunity to vote. Check out the link on today's show notes page to weigh in, and then join us live on the 8th to find out what the results were.
2.
In this week's Dial P for Procurement podcast, I covered a very high-stakes situation that will be all too familiar to most procurement professionals. NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, has long struggled to get its members to uphold their commitment to spend a minimum of 2% of their national GDP on military readiness. With Russia's invasion of Ukraine, that push has once again become more urgent. Now they are also trying to standardize their suppliers. The goal is to have more leverage with fewer suppliers and to have equipment and supplies more interchangeable on the battlefield. Sound familiar? Yes, this is a classic multi-stakeholder strategic sourcing scenario. The concept is great, but since countries, like business units, tend to buy from suppliers that they like and know, a lot of relationships have to be broken in order to achieve this goal. Can you relate? I certainly can. When I think about my practitioner experiences doing this kind of work with pest control services and uniforms, and then try to apply that to international military defense, I have absolutely no idea how they're going to resolve this. You can find the episode linked in the show notes or in the Dial P for Procurement podcast stream on all major podcast listening platforms.
1.
Before I let you go, we also have another AOP Live session on the calendar for November, one that we are hosting with a large panel of executives and practitioners. Join us on November 15th at 11 a.m. Eastern for a session on eliminating obstacles to value through the procurement experience, a live collaboration with Globality. As with all of these events, you can ask questions in advance or live on the day of, and we'll put them to our guests. Go to artofprocurement.com/calendar and sign up today.
Thanks for listening. We'll be back next Friday at 6 a.m. U.S. Eastern Time. If you've enjoyed this pod, help us grow and tell your peers to search for Procurement 6 wherever they get their podcasts.